Have you ever paused to wonder whether ancient Ethiopian scriptures could reveal timeless guidance for the complex challenges we all encounter in the modern world? Perhaps you have heard of the Book of Enoch or the Book of Jubilees, maybe even caught distant references to Ethiopian biblical canons, but never fully explored how these writings could speak to your own life. Today, we will begin a journey through these mysterious texts, opening ourselves to the possibility that old wisdom, preserved for centuries by the Ethiopian tradition, can illuminate the ethical dilemmas of our technological age. Far from being dusty scrolls fit only for historians, these sacred works carry resonances that can shift the way we see artificial intelligence, nuclear power, social media, and our broader moral obligations. If you feel a spark of curiosity, stay with me. Together, we will explore Enoch's teachings on the fallen angels, how Jubilees interprets early biblical narratives, and how other Ethiopian writings might cast new light on the very questions that define our day-to-day lives. From the very first lines of the Book of Enoch, you sense the sweep of an ancient worldview. Unlike Western biblical canons, which typically exclude Enoch, the Ethiopian tradition has long preserved it as a cherished text. It was read and revered in communities that trace their lineage back centuries, possibly to the era of the Queen of Sheba and her contacts with King Solomon. The Book of Enoch stands out with a bold premise. It describes events on earth before the flood, focusing on otherworldly beings known as the Watchers, who descended from heaven and interacted directly with humanity. The text depicts them bestowing forbidden knowledge on people, metallurgy, weapon making, magic, and so forth, yet also plunging society into corruption. The drama that unfolds is not merely a story of sin, but a cautionary tale about how easily knowledge can be misused. Over time, God's judgment follows, culminating in a cataclysm reminiscent of the biblical flood. To some, Enoch's account feels like a more elaborate version of certain Genesis passages, but it adds a richness absent from the standard canon. More than that, it poses a question that resonates profoundly. What is the cost of progress when we lack the moral compass to guide it? If you were to step back and examine the parallels to our own time, they become startling. The Watcher's gift of knowledge in forging swords or stirring up magical arts can remind us of how we use advanced technologies. We might consider artificial intelligence not as a direct parallel to forging swords, but as a powerful new craft that can reshape daily life. Like the Watchers in Enoch, modern innovators sometimes bestow these tools without fully preparing society for the ethical ramifications. It is easy to draw lines from Enoch's story to our own. In that ancient drama, knowledge in the hands of an unprepared populace led to violence and moral decay. We can see glimpses of that pattern when we observe how nuclear technology, originally touted as a means to secure peace, gave us the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or how new weapons of cyber warfare threaten entire infrastructures. It is crucial to note that the Book of Enoch does not condemn knowledge outright. There is a pivotal verse, Enoch 8:1-2, stating that Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them. The text continues, describing how wrongdoing grew exponentially once these secrets were out in the open. As we weigh these words, we realize that the distance between forging a sword in an ancient tale and launching a new AI platform is shorter than it seems. We can then turn to the Book of Jubilees, another text dear to Ethiopian tradition. It retells portions of Genesis and Exodus with added detail and interpretation, casting events in a chronological structure segmented into Jubilees. For instance, it delves into the fall of the angels, the corruption before the flood, and the moral lessons gleaned from patriarchal experiences. By bridging the primeval world of Genesis with interpretive commentary, Jubilees aims to guide its readers in applying timeless lessons. If you read it with a modern eye, you see how the stories revolve around responsibilities within families, communities, and societies. In one sense, the Book of Jubilees acts like an ancient commentary on moral accountability. If Enoch focuses on the cosmic scale of fallen angels, Jubilees focuses more on how that transgression filters down into human interactions and law. The synergy of these two texts exemplifies how Ethiopian tradition held a broader canon, one that offered elaborate cautionary stories and moral frameworks. At times, Christian communities outside Ethiopia never encountered the Book of Enoch or the Book of Jubilees, leaving them with only hints in canonical scripture of the Watchers, rebellion, or the complexities of pre-flood life. Now, let us connect these writings to the real crises we face, from nuclear weapons to global surveillance, from climate change to vast social media platforms. The world is reeling under the weight of technologies that promise salvation, even as they threaten calamity. If we distill the message from Enoch and Jubilees, we hear a repeated refrain: humans must accept that knowledge entails responsibility. The Watchers who taught forbidden skills to humankind did not stay to ensure the moral use of those skills. In ignoring that responsibility, they precipitated a downfall that Enoch laments, describing a world so steeped in violence and exploitation that only divine judgment could reset it. That message resonates eerily with how the 20th century saw two world wars harness modern weaponry to unleash devastation. At times, reading Enoch can feel archaic, but behind these ancient images, the vital lesson emerges: an unchecked thirst for power or profit blinds us to the moral dimension of invention. Whether we are talking about forging swords in a primordial era or coding algorithms to gather personal data, we wrestle with the same fundamental question: who oversees the use of knowledge? And what ethical framework is in place? Enoch's Watchers serve as a metaphor for any unaccountable elite, be they angels or modern developers, who introduce breakthroughs without regard for the collective good. As we carry this conversation forward, we can recall how historically many Christian communities recognized the synergy between moral restraint and human creativity. Yet modernity often severs that link. That is precisely where the words of these ancient Ethiopian texts can pierce the heart. We might recognize that the Watchers' sin was not simply imparting knowledge, but imparting it devoid of reverence for the fundamental sanctity of life. True wisdom, in this sense, emerges not from knowledge alone, but from embedding moral orientation at every stage of innovation. Turning to Jubilees, we see how an entire retelling of early biblical history can shape communal identity. By diving into genealogies and moral episodes, Jubilees depicts a cosmos where every breach of divine command leads to social unraveling. That pattern resonates with the complexities of modern geopolitics, where ignoring moral or environmental mandates triggers conflicts, collapses, or crises that eventually harm everyone. Jubilees encourages readers to anchor themselves in justice, obedience to the divine will, and faithfulness to covenant. Within these Ethiopian texts, you can also find a sense of cosmic interplay between visible and invisible realms. Enoch's journeys describe the interplay of heaven and earth in vivid terms, as though the spiritual dimension is not remote, but intimately connected to daily choices. This perspective can challenge the modern world's tendency to see technology or politics purely in secular terms. Indeed, if we remain mindful that every action ripples through moral and even spiritual dimensions, we might proceed with more humility. The Watchers forgot that boundary between the divine order and the worldly sphere, imposing their knowledge in ways God had not authorized. Their downfall thereby stands as a cosmic cautionary tale. Some might wonder what precisely is Ethiopian about these texts, beyond the fact that Ethiopia preserved them. Ethiopia's Christian heritage, stretching back possibly to the apostolic age, treated Enoch and Jubilees with a reverence that was lost in the West. This historical divergence underscores how major Christian traditions can grow in parallel yet diverge on scriptural canons. In Ethiopia, Enoch remained part of sacred reading, shaping local theology and worldview, while in the West it remained apocryphal or merely a scholarly curiosity. It is also worth noting that Enoch's account of the Watchers resonates with older myths from other cultures about deities or spiritual beings, giving humans forbidden arts. The Greek myth of Prometheus can serve as a parallel, though Enoch presents a more cautionary view. In Enoch, the Watchers taught humanity in ways that fostered arrogance, war, and moral decay. This tension between a beneficial gift and a ruinous outcome echoes strongly in the modern age, where we wrestle with the ambiguous legacy of scientific breakthroughs. In the swirl of these ancient stories, we might find hope for bridging the gap between ancient ethics and modern existence. The Watchers, who so catastrophically taught humans the secrets of forging weapons, remind us that each piece of technology introduced has repercussions that may echo far beyond the immediate moment. Enoch records that after these teachings proliferated, men began devouring one another, and sin multiplied exponentially. This dire vision parallels how technology might enable destructive conflicts if we do not cultivate an ethic of compassion and justice. Moving beyond Enoch and Jubilees, Ethiopian tradition also embraces a strong reverence for moral frameworks, spelled out in the rest of Scripture. The synergy of these texts encourages an ethos of responsibility that could transform how we approach AI and social media. Instead of designing platforms purely for revenue, we might recall how unrestrained knowledge in the Watchers' hands led to cosmic breakdown. We might recall Jubilees describing in detail how moral norms must be upheld to preserve societal harmony. We can also glean from these Ethiopian scriptures a deep sense of continuity with older patriarchal stories. Jubilees reiterates episodes from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, weaving them into a tapestry that underscores how each generation inherits a moral responsibility from the covenant. If we apply that thinking to how each generation inherits the technological breakthroughs of its predecessor, we see that responsibility as transgenerational. The Watchers in Enoch introduced knowledge once and left humanity to its fate, and chaos ensued. Modern society must likewise remain vigilant about passing on not just the secrets of technology, but the moral frameworks to handle them responsibly. Looking back to the question of how these Ethiopian texts can actually affect your personal life, do not forget that Enoch's depiction of Watchers crossing heavenly boundaries is also a story of hubris. Whether you see yourself as a developer, a policymaker, an educator, or an individual user of technology, the Watchers exemplify the perils of overestimating one's ability to manage the consequences of new powers. We, likewise, hold the secrets of the atom, the genome, data analytics. Without a sense of awe and moral guardianship, we might share in the Watchers' downfall. Though ours may take the form of nuclear or AI-driven catastrophe. Enoch's text tells us that no matter how grand your knowledge, there is always a moral order that can be transgressed at your peril. Now perhaps you see how the Book of Jubilees folds into that perspective, grounding lofty moral warnings in everyday structures like genealogies and family lines. In Jubilees, each generation bears the imprint of prior choices and either honors or breaks the covenants that shape them. That pattern resonates with how we approach the planet, our technologies, and our societies. The Watchers' sin did not vanish at the flood. It echoes whenever we exploit knowledge for self-serving ends, ignoring future impacts. By contrast, we can choose to apply knowledge ethically, upholding moral norms that preserve life. One might also ask, is there a specifically African dimension to these lessons? Given that Ethiopia stands at the crossroads of ancient traditions, bridging sub-Saharan and Middle Eastern worlds, possibly yes. Ethiopia's unique historical position allowed it to preserve older Christian texts that the Roman and later Western traditions did not. At a time when Africa itself faces enormous challenges in adopting new technologies, these ancient writings could serve as moral guides, reminding societies not to repeat the Watchers' sin. Indeed, Watchers' hubris can arise anywhere, not just in biblical days, but wherever knowledge advances faster than ethical oversight. Finally, do not let your journey end with mere intellectual curiosity. The Watchers' story is a dire warning, but also a call to action. You can examine your personal use of technology, your engagement with media, or your willingness to challenge unethical applications of progress. Maybe you can delve deeper into the Ethiopian Christian tradition, reading not only Enoch, but also exploring how these communities interpret Scripture as a living moral code. By internalizing the Watchers' cautionary tale, you might sense an urgency to ensure that our tools do not become instruments of mass chaos. In your daily life, perhaps the simplest application is to remain aware that each new invention has a moral dimension. The Watchers gave humans the means to craft weapons, leading to violence and downfall. We can consider how modern life is full of Watchers in the shape of innovators or investors who might unwittingly pave the way for exploitation or manipulation. Our role is to watch them in turn, to question, to demand ethical frameworks. Maybe that is how we ensure we do not repeat the Watchers' story. Perhaps if you find yourself designing technology, you can keep Enoch's words in mind, championing accountability. Thus we see how these ancient Ethiopian texts, though centuries old, remain vibrant and urgent. Whether we approach them as believers seeking spiritual depth or as citizens searching for universal wisdom, the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees beckon us. They remind us that knowledge and morality must never be severed. They caution us about repeating the Watchers' hubris. They highlight continuity across generations, as Jubilees so carefully lays out, challenging us to pass on both innovation and the moral scaffolding to use it justly. As we come to a close, remember that the Watchers' downfall in Enoch was not inevitable. It sprang from willful disregard of boundaries set by divine wisdom. Our era likewise faces boundaries, environmental thresholds, ethical lines in artificial intelligence, matters of war and peace shaped by technologies that threaten to outpace our moral readiness. If we heed these ancient warnings, we might avoid the Watcher's fate, forging a future shaped by justice, compassion, and foresight rather than by heedless ambition. That, in essence, is how the Ethiopian tradition can transform our view of modern challenges. It offers a deeper biblical tapestry, linking primal events to our contemporary crossroads. May you leave with a renewed appreciation for these ancient texts, seeing them not as dusty myths, but as living lessons. If you continue delving deeper, may you discover timeless warnings and seeds of wisdom that shape a more conscientious future. The Watchers stand as a monument to uncontrolled knowledge, but we can choose humility and ethical vigilance instead.